Hey everyone, this is Kelly. Just wanted to give you a quick reminder that on Tuesday, November 6th, that's right, Election Day, we're going to be doing a live show at 8 p.m. Central. So tune in on Facebook Live or Twitter Live. Don't watch Boring Strangers on cable. Watch your favorite Midwestern moms and go vote. Hi everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. You can tell we're a week out from the election because I am totally losing my voice. And today I am here with Jamie Carter, who is a field organizer for the Utah Democratic Party, and she's also active on Twitter, where some of you may know her from. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Kelly.
How are you today?
A little nervous, but fired up.
All right, awesome. So I have been looking forward to talking to you because anyone who's listened to this podcast for a really long time knows that I'm kind of in love with Utah Democrats. I think that Utah is one of the states where it's the most exciting to watch the Democrats sort of come into their own. And I know you've been doing a ton of knocking doors, and so just kind of wanted to get some insight into what sorts of things you're hearing and seeing and feeling on the ground in Utah, and then also maybe give some advice to people who might be going out canvassing for the first time this weekend, for the last weekend. So maybe could you tell people who don't know you from Twitter just sort of a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the Utah Democratic Party?
Yeah, like a lot of us, I was a little politically active before the last election, but the last election hit and everything changed, and I became very involved in the politics. And through organizing a few marches, got to know some people and applied when the Utah Democrats were hiring as a field organizer, thinking no way I was going to get this job. I've never done anything like that before, but they did hire me, and it's been an experience of a lifetime. I have amazing candidates, on the state level. Our federal candidates in Utah are doing more than any candidates ever have before in this state. Shireen is just phenomenal. Jenny Wilson is such an incredible person. We have the first Navajo on the ballot with James Singer, and they're out knocking doors, making phone calls. We have made over 615,000 phone calls and doors knocked this year. To put that in comparison, in 2016, during a presidential campaign, we only hit over 300,000. So we have more than doubled the efforts in 2016. And that is so exciting to be a part of.
Yeah, that is really fantastic. I love the energy in Utah. And I think it's a place where you can really see the difference. I mean, those numbers are incredible. And so in places where there's been Democrats running and organizing for a long time, and it's just more now, it's not as easy to see that stark difference, but that's really incredible.
Yeah, and most of the people that we talk to, they have never been canvassed by anybody. Republicans have ignored them, thinking they're safe. Democrats have ignored them, thinking we don't have a chance. So we are out talking to people who have never, ever been engaged in this process before. And that, to me, has just been amazing. They really do open their doors to you. They're willing to talk to you on the phone. And most of the time, they have a lot to say because they've never been heard before. And they're so grateful that somebody is taking the time to actually listen to what their concerns are, what they have to say. And this is red, blue, independent. It doesn't matter. They want to talk. They want someone to listen.
So are you guys talking to basically everybody? I know sometimes campaigns say, oh, we're just going to talk to the Democrats and just focus on turnout. But it sounds like you guys are really just sort of trying to do outreach everywhere.
We are actually not talking to Democrats until this last week when we went to get out the vote. Before, I would say about a week and a half ago, we only talked to independent and Republican voters. And then, of course, we would do Democrats who typically don't vote. But we really were focused on reaching independent and Republican voters this year. And that to me has been just unbelievable because Utah is a very friendly state. And the majority of people don't like what's going on. They don't like seeing families separated at the border. They don't like this hateful rhetoric that they're hearing from their leaders. They're very concerned about their health care. And these are all the issues that we're hearing on the ground that, their elected officials, even though, and this is from the Republicans, aren't listening to them.
Utah, in some ways, it's going to sound like it's nothing like Illinois, but it's like Illinois in that the majority of the voters are concentrated in a single city, in Salt Lake City. Like in Illinois, the majority of the voters are concentrated in Chicago. Of course, the difference being, Chicago has like 8 congressional districts all by itself. But
yeah.
But that does, I think, lend a certain challenge to doing outreach in a place like Utah, because there's lots of voters in one place and then a whole lot of voters that are just spread out throughout a very big state.
Yeah, my districts that I'm working with are all outside of Salt Lake City. And so my closest is 45 minutes away, clear up to about a 4-hour drive. And that is where I've been knocking for the last 3 months. And especially in those areas, nobody has ever gone to their door before.
You said that people are happy to be talking to somebody and they don't necessarily agree with things that are going on in the country. Do you think that some of them will be voting for Democrats this year?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. They are excited to vote. We are seeing record turnout in Utah so far, and we're probably one of the only red states that is actually trying to increase voting rights. And so we went to mail-in ballots this year. We went to same-day voter registration this year. They made online voting registration very, very easy. And we also have 3 propositions on the ballot, which is really going to generate voters to the polls. We've got medical marijuana, Medicaid expansion, the end of gerrymandering. So those are really going to drive our base voters to the polls, but it's going to get a lot of independent and Republican voters who also believe in those things.
To put things in perspective, let's say the Democrats don't manage to actually flip seats at the Senate level or at the House level. Could they still make really big inroads? Some of these districts, there's been really, really drastic difference in numbers.
Yeah, and we're so gerrymandered.
Right. So in fact, we could see some real progress, and a lot of the efforts that you guys are making could be paying off that might not actually lead to flipped seats, but could really set things up well for the future.
Yeah, especially at the state level, there are 4 or 5 state Senate seats that have a real opportunity to flip, along with anywhere from 7 to 15 state House seats that could flip. And if we can flip 5 state Senate seats and 12 state House seats, we can actually end supermajority control by the Republican Party at the state level. Ben McAdams, though, in Utah Congressional District 4, he is now up 6 points in the polls.
Yeah, that one I think is definitely the one to watch. And really, I've been thinking about these sorts of things a lot, of making sure that people don't just focus on sort of the top line. I mean, of course, I very much want Jenny Wilson and Shireen Corbani to win, but I want people to remember sort of the progress that we'll see and not get too disappointed if not everybody we want to win wins on November 6th, but in fact, we see a lot of progress, that could still be really good.
I think we will see a lot of progress, and I think most people underestimate the work that Jenny and Shireen have done. Mm-hmm. Shireen has knocked on over 70,000 doors, and not just in Salt Lake City. She's doing outreach in St. George and in Tooele and, Republican strongholds. Shireen is everywhere. And Jenny is out every single day, making phone calls, knocking doors. We've never seen candidates do this before. And that's starting to make a real impact. And you're seeing it with the enthusiasm. You're seeing it with the people that are posting on social media, I'm voting for you. And you're seeing it with the number of volunteers that are showing up. Our office is completely full of people. I actually had to come sit in my car to do this tonight because our Democratic office probably has about 30 volunteers texting and phone calling right now.
That's amazing. And that makes me so happy. And I think is such a great sign of sort of what we can really do when we set our minds and our hearts to it in this country.
Yeah, and we even had 2 camera crews here today from local news stations reporting on what we're doing, which is unheard of.
That's
Nobody
excellent.
cared about what the Utah Democrats were doing, and suddenly it's like, wow, they're working. So I'm really excited. I really think Shireen is going to be a wild card, and she is going to shock everybody because nobody in Utah has seen the likes of a Shireen Gorabani before. She is probably one of the most underrated, underreported candidates in this country, and she is one of the top candidates in this country. I cannot say enough how fabulous Shireen and Jenny are.
And I hope they win anyway because I love them. But I also hope they win because then I can, hold it over everyone's head that they were on our podcast.
They're working it.
So the other thing I want to sort of talk to you about is for people who are going out canvassing this weekend. So there's this huge push to get a lot of people out for the last weekend. And I think a lot of people, they want to do this. They want to go out and make a difference, but they're still kind of scared of canvassing. And so I thought maybe since you've done a ton of canvassing and a lot of it in rural areas and a lot of it with, traditionally Republican voters, talk us through a little bit kind of what canvassing is really like on the ground.
The majority of people, you'll always get one or two that are a little crazy. But even if you knock on somebody who is a hardcore supporter of a Republicans or Trump, when you're actually face to face, very, very rarely do you come across anybody who is actually rude. Most of the time, they will actually thank you for going out and doing what you're doing because they still appreciate it. And in the real world, a lot of this rhetoric that you see online and the divisiveness goes away when you're having that face-to-face conversation. People really do connect with you, and they're willing to have a real conversation in person and not the hate that you see online. And I have been thanked so many times by Republicans, or, you're at the wrong door. I don't know why you're here, but thank you for what you're doing and keep going because I think it's great.
That's great. Do you think that there are things that you've been able to say that have made connections with people, things that have helped them realize that, in fact, it's in their best interest to vote for the Democrat?
Yes. And, even when I'm doing texting and somebody says, I'm voting, I already voted, but I voted for Republicans, I always reply and thank them for voting. And 99% of the time, they'll reply, thank you and good luck. And because everybody wants to see democracy in action. And almost everybody appreciates the efforts that are going in. And you don't see the hate that that the news media likes to come across, and you don't see the divisions. And almost always you can come across one issue that they will agree with the Democratic Party on, whether it's public lands or education or air quality or the environment, better wages. There's always that one issue that you can connect with them. And who knows what's going to happen when they go into the polls. They very well could remember, you know what? It was that Democrat who knocked on the door and actually took the time to talk to me. Maybe I'll take a chance this time. We don't know. But that's a very real possibility. because they're going to remember you. They're not going to remember the Republican who did nothing to try to get their vote.
Have you been in any situations that have been scary? I know that's the other thing people worry about, that, they're going to get chased or shot or dogs after them or something. Is that the kind of thing that actually happens in real life?
No, I have knocked on, I don't even know how many doors, and I have never had that happen. If you come up with a fence, rattle the fence first before you go in, just to make sure there's not a dog there. But even the dogs that I found, I have made so many new friends with the dogs, and that's actually a great way to bond with the person. When you're friends with their dog, I actually carry dog treats with me, because that's just a little extra, and the people at the door again love it. When you have a dog treat for their furry friends, and they appreciate the little things like that. But my biggest advice is be yourself. Don't be somebody you're not, and because then you're real and you're making the connection, and it's all about that connection. You're going to be given a script. Take that script, but make it your own. Tell your own story. Tell people why you're out there canvassing, why you believe in that candidate, and then that comes across as genuine, and people really respond to that.
All right. Well, is there anything else that we should be sure to talk about?
Make sure you vote. Go vote.
If there's anyone taking the time to listen to this podcast who is not voting, I don't even know what to do about that. Yes, definitely go vote. Go vote early if that's a possibility, so you don't have to worry about something happening on election day. I've already gone to vote.
Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, and and I'm going to end with a funny story that happened when I was canvassing this weekend. It's a small rural town. I'm a stranger walking around, and it's one of the nicer neighborhoods, and a cop pulls up, asks me what I'm doing there. So I immediately pulled out my lit and said, "Have you voted yet?" "No." "Are you planning to vote?" "Yes." "Great. Have you heard of Tim Glenn and Jenny Wilson?" "I haven't." "Well, let me give you some lit." And I think the cop is going to vote. I think he's going to vote for Tim and Jenny. And then, this is, again, small town. The next 3 houses I knocked at, when they answered the door, they said, "Oh, you're the vote lady that's going around talking to folks."
That's excellent. From now on, Jamie, I'm going to call you the vote lady.
It was so funny, but the cop did not even know what to say. And he took my lit and left, and obviously told everybody that I was just the vote lady walking around, and I was okay.
All right. Well, vote lady Jamie, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I'm so excited about Utah this year, and I think it's so excellent, all this work that you guys are doing, and is really going to be, I think this is really a moment that changes us, right? Like, whatever the outcome of this election, I think this moment where we all decided we take charge, we're not going to let things keep happening to us, we're going to make things happen, that this is just, it's great.
And then you see all these young, dynamic candidates running for office the first time. They're not politicians. They're not taking corporate PAC money, and they're in this for the right reasons. And that's what's so exciting to me, from, county commissioners to county clerks to, the state senates and the state houses. And this is happening all over the country. Every day people are stepping up to run for office for the smallest seats, and they're putting in the work. And that, to me, is so exciting, because it's a new breed of politician that's running, because they're not politicians, they're us.
All right. Well, that's a good way to close. So, Jamie, thank you so much for talking to me, and maybe we'll catch up again on election night.
Yes. Well, thank you. And you keep up the good work.
And keep my voice.
And keep your voice.
Hi, I'm Jenny Kaplan, and I'm the host of Wonder Media Network's podcast, Women Belong in the House. It's been a dark few years, but More people than ever are stepping up and taking action. A record number of women are running for office this year. We're telling their stories. I'm asking, who are these people and why in the world did they decide to run? Why are there so few women in office to begin with? And what would be different if that changed? Check out Women Belong in the House wherever you get your podcasts. We'll bring you a weekly dose of hope and optimism.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly. You've got the two sick broads tonight. I'm here with Sophy, who may or may not have strep throat. Hey, Sophy.
Hey, Kelly.
And joining us tonight is the hopefully very healthy Tim Glenn, who is running in Utah for the State House District 69. Hi, Tim.
Hi. Yeah, knock on wood. Hopefully I don't get sick within the next week.
Yes, at least hold out for the next week. So thank you for joining us. Can you start just by telling us a little bit about your background and why you're running for the Utah House?
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of a huge question. But I my background is in history and cultural resources. I'm a museum director in my regular life, and I have always sort of been someone that's interested in policy, but not so much politics, like being involved in politics. But then, over the last couple of years, sort of as someone who is, pretty engaged in my local community, tried to I don't know, figure out how I could, I don't know, I didn't want to look back when I was 50 and say, like, what did I do? And this felt like something that I could actually succeed at. And so threw my name in the ring.
All right. And so District 69 is a fairly rural district. Where is this in Utah?
Very rural district. So we are in southeastern Utah, which is portions of my district cover the city of Moab, and Arches National Park is in my district. I live in a place called Green River, which is a town of 950 people. And then there are a handful of towns in this district, but it's a lot of land and then a lot of sort of small towns scattered throughout. A lot of extraction, a lot of tourism industry, a lot of farming, agriculture. So very rural.
So that must be a bigger geographic region than a lot of state representatives need to be out canvassing in.
Absolutely, yeah. I've driven over 4,000 miles during the last year trying to just reach voters in my district, and that you would be surprised how few voters 4,000 miles actually represent.
Yeah, I'm looking at a map of Utah right now, and it's like there's 20 million districts in and around Salt Lake City.
Yeah, right.
There's some very, very big ones around the outsides of Utah.
Yes.
All right. And so then what are the kinds of things that you're hearing from voters as you're putting all these miles on your car talking to them?
I think the biggest concern from voters right now is in our district, historically, our district has been really very reliant on coal jobs and the coal industry, extraction across the board, and also power. So there's a couple of power plants that provide a lot of different jobs in communities in my district. And so a lot of people are really concerned because we're in this sort of shifting period, and there's a lot of people who are, trying to sort of bring back the coal industry. There are a lot of people who think that it's time for these communities to move on. Some of these, Moab specifically, is a community that has sort of moved away from extraction and has obviously looked towards tourism, but even that is not everybody agrees with that. A lot of people call that industrial tourism, and there's a lot of, I would just say, economic worry still, and a lot of worry about jobs.
So one of the things I really liked about your website is you talk about how you are personally planning on voting on the ballot initiatives in Utah in 2018. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you feel about the three propositions that you mentioned on your website: the medical cannabis proposition, the Medicaid expansion, and the Better Boundaries proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. So medical cannabis is something that people have been trying to pass in Utah for a few years now. I fully support it. I think that it's the ethical choice. I think that especially in my district, there's a huge opioid crisis right now. And there's studies that have shown that medical cannabis, where it's introduced in areas of high opioid use, the opioid use goes down because people aren't, they have options for prescriptions for their pain. And I just think that people should, it's the sort of thing that that people should be able to make that choice with their doctor, and we shouldn't be limiting medicine from people. Mm-hmm. Medicaid expansion, I mean, similarly, I think anytime that I can vote for giving healthcare to somebody, I'm going to vote for that. Like healthcare is literally on the ballot in Utah, and I don't see how you can vote against it. And I think that, I mean, sure, there are people that talk about the costs associated, but right now Utah pays the taxes for Medicaid expansion. It goes to the federal government, but we don't get the money back because the state of Utah has chosen not to participate. And so, yeah, that's a big deal. And then Prop 4 is better boundaries, which is to create a nonpartisan committee or board to help decide redistricting boundaries, which this district was gerrymandered after 2010 in a bad way. And the way I see it is it's not fair for either side. So our district, they cut up a very, very right-leaning, heavily Republican county into 3 different districts. And so just because they knew they could rely on those votes. So not only did they cut up areas where there were left-leaning people, but they gave worse representation to a county that was right-leaning, and it was just because they knew they were going to get those votes, right? And so I think that obviously this is a fairly liberal view, but redistricting and gerrymandering has just been like a scourge upon our country over the last who knows how long. And so, especially in Utah, I would love to see an opportunity for a nonpartisan group to draw those lines.
So you're a pretty young candidate, and you have a young family, you have young kids. I noticed that one of the things is on your Facebook page, you get a lot of comments from sort of both sides. You know, there's supportive ones, but there are not so supportive ones. And it seems like you've kept a very sort of open, positive, upbeat way of responding to those kinds of comments, which I think is really great. Can you talk about that a little, you know, sort of what that dynamic is like, being a public figure, having people sort of attack you for things that may or may not even be things that you believe, but rather sort of what they think Democrats are?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, and it's like kind of picked up a lot in the last couple of weeks. And it's funny you mentioned that. I was late calling you because we were having trouble putting our kids to bed. So yeah, it's a balancing act. But yeah, I mean, I think that I don't love to talk about my strengths, which is an odd, I think, thing for a candidate to say, but I think that one of my strengths is respecting other people's opinions, even if it's pretty aggressive, and even if it's something that I really disagree with, or I think is flat out wrong. I think no matter what, you kind of have to start with a baseline level of respect for the human being in front of you. And I think that's where a lot of my responses to people comes from, is just sort of trying to, I personally don't see any value in sort of like online arguments or just this sort of like dehumanization that happens in social media and just arguing with faces on a screen and versus like actual people. And so I've tried to show that like candidates are humans, and especially someone like me, I've never wanted to be a politician. You know, that's not something that I don't even know if I want to be a politician. If I win, after I win, I don't know, like how, I don't want a career in politics is what I'm trying to say. And so to like have people put you in a box when you don't necessarily belong in that box, or maybe you do belong in that box, but they haven't even like taken the time to like recognize your humanity before they put you in that box. I really hate when people do that to me. And so I try not to do that to others. But I will say that like there comes a point when it's like on my Facebook page right now, there are some pretty hateful things. And so like I've kind of had a personal policy to like to respond to people with humanity and say like, hey, I see you're a person. Do you see that I'm a person? And then if they don't respond well after that, I just ban them. So I don't know if it's, yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We had a tweet go viral over the weekend, and, you know, for the most part, it was very nice comments, but there were a few that were not so nice, and I tried to be respectful and say nice things, and then, yeah, if they clearly weren't going to be nice in response. It was like, okay, I've had enough of you. Block.
Yeah.
But we're not running for office, so we don't have to
Right.
walk any lines of being nice if we don't feel like it. In person, are you seeing that same sort of dynamic, or are people in person generally nicer and not sort of putting you into boxes like that?
It's a night and day difference. In person, like, we can have respectful conversations and we can disagree on things. And yeah, I would say it's completely different. And it's actually something that if I win, thought about how am I going to connect to these people if I win, because as a candidate, like you don't just get to be the representative of the people that agree with you, right? You have to be the representative for everybody. And so I think that's kind of key. And I've thought like really connecting with people face to face, even though, some of these places are like, 2.5 hours, 3 hours away from where I live, but it's worth sort of spending some significant time in those communities to try and make inroads to show that, like somebody today said that I was the scum of humanity because I was a Democrat. And I think that's just probably someone that doesn't know a lot of Democrats.
Or people.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the question of our time, right? In general, is we all need to reconnect. Whatever happens with this election, whatever happens in 2020, like somehow we all have to learn to get along as people again. And I think that talking to people and meeting them in person seems to be the only way that can really happen.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I've been trying to understand the electoral history of this district, and it seems like the woman who is currently the Republican incumbent used to be a Democrat.
She was, yeah. She was a Democratic representative in the state house. And then after our district was gerrymandered, she lost. And it's kind of funny, from what I hear, even the Republican leaders in the state house, they didn't even know that the district was in play during that election. So like when the Republican won, none of them they had never even met the guy who won. They had no idea who he was. They did that good of a job. So yeah, she switched then. Historically, it's been like the one sort of Democratic stronghold off the Wasatch Front outside of like the Salt Lake City metropolitan area. But then when they redrew the lines, it became more of a 50-50 district. And I think this election is it'll be a really interesting sort of signpost along the way, because the last few people who have run, they've come from one specific county. And so it's hard to know if people were sort of supporting the Democrat because they knew him, or if they were supporting Democrats. And I come from a community that's about an hour away from like the major population base, which is still only, like 20,000 people, but a lot of them don't know me personally. So it'll be a real interesting sort of marker for whether or not it is actually a 50-50 district, or if they were just supporting a popular person in their county.
Well, and it was really close in 2016. So the Republican only won by a little over 300 votes.
Yeah.
So it really feels like the kind of district that a lot of hard work knocking doors can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying.
Well, and it seems like it should help then having strong candidates up and down the ballot. So Jenny Wilson running for Senate, who we've had on the podcast, and this is the district where James Courage Singer is running. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Congressional district. Yeah. And so having him running a strong campaign, it feels like that could and should hopefully make a difference.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful, and also those ballot initiatives are hopefully driving a lot of voters as well. It's really sort of one of those districts that I don't think anybody can. You could make an argument for anything in this district, like a sure thing for the Republican, a sure thing for me. It's really hard to know.
And presumably, there's not a lot of polling.
No. Yeah. The polling is the people who I talk to at their doorstep.
So I see you talking on social media about transient room tax, that's something as you go from place to place around the district that you're hearing about. And I have no idea what that is. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, for sure. So transient room tax is basically it's a hotel tax. So you go and you stay in a hotel in Moab, you end up paying a tax for staying in that hotel. And historically, it's been a growing tax in this district, especially for that area and for the area that I live in. But the state, when they set it up, they created in the code. It's a tax that goes back to the counties, but they say that the counties can only spend 1/3 of the tax on infrastructure, and they have to spend 2/3 of the tax on marketing. And the idea was that if the hotels are paying the tax, then they should see some benefit from the tax. But the mistake was that the hotels aren't actually paying the tax. You and I are paying the tax. And it assumes that a tourist has no impact on the space that they inhabit, right? So like you go to Moab, you're going to use the toilet and you're going to buy food and you're going to use the roads and you're going to walk on the trails and you're going to really have an impact on the space that you inhabit, right? But if the community that supports you can't actually use the money that you're paying to mitigate the impact that you have, disaster comes. And that's what's happened in a lot of these communities, in Moab specifically. They had more money in transient room tax. They did $5 million in transient room tax than they did in property taxes. And so that means that there were literally like hundreds of thousands of people who were impacting their city without, and the city was unable to actually mitigate the cost of that impact because they had to spend $3.5 million on marketing, which I'm sure like you guys, you're in Chicago, right?
I am, yeah. Sophie's in Madison.
So you've probably heard of Moab, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Moab doesn't need to spend $3.5 million on marketing, but they do need to spend some money on their infrastructure. And so it's a huge deal. Like counties should be able to just set a budget. That's my solution. A budget to say like, oh, we expect to receive X amount of dollars, but we have these specific needs in our community. And so we're going to spend 3/5 of the transient room tax on infrastructure this year. And what I see is why that's not just a specific to Moab issue. As our communities in this district move away from extraction, there's got to be something else. And a lot of small towns, they don't actually want tourism, right? They don't see that it provides good jobs. They don't necessarily want a bunch of people coming to their community, and they also don't really want to have to market their communities, right? Like you don't everything I hear in southeastern Utah is we'd like to have a little tourism, but we don't want to be Moab. And so I see this as a way to sort of provide a bridge from potential extraction industries to tourism industries without sort of becoming these overused, overrun communities or landscapes, and actually have a positive impact on the people who live in these communities. So like if I'll tell you, like in the summer where I live, the grocery store is a terrible place to go because there's just like so many people. But if we could benefit from the money and not have to market as much and try to find a better balance, that would be I think it would be a lot more attractive to local communities in these rural areas.
So I know in Utah, as in many other places in the West, public lands are important. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how Utah values public land and sort of what you want to do for public lands in Utah.
Yeah. So I believe that public lands are a protection for the middle class. And I'll probably go to my grave saying that public lands are protection for the middle class. And there's this sort of like growing thing happening in the West where a lot of states are trying to, it's been happening in Utah for a long time. We're kind of ground zero. A lot of states are trying to take control of federal lands and have states control those lands. And that really is sort of like a loud voice coming from rural Utah politicians. And I think that's a mistake. I think that our state politicians and the state code they're not accountable to us in the same way that our representatives on the federal level are. And so there's no Utah State EPA, right? There's no protections or to stop the state from selling off public lands. In fact, they do it all the time with the public lands that they have right now. And so I can understand there's this middle ground that I think people are missing in rural Utah, and I think it's not just like wilderness wanderers or quote unquote environmentalists or people that are that don't want anything, people who love wilderness. I think people who rely on public lands for energy and for extraction and for jobs are missing that public lands are actually a real benefit to our communities. Because like the thing I say is, you go to Texas and there are no public lands. I mean, there are very little public lands. And so you have to be a very wealthy person to sort of like have a ranch or to build some sort of like extraction industry. You have to be very, very wealthy. And the same is true here. But here, there is money that actually comes from the federal government. Anytime somebody uses public lands and it goes right back into your county, it's called a lease. And you have to pay to the public to lease their federal land. And if that becomes private, which would happen under state-controlled land, those counties would no longer see that money anymore. And I think it's something that people are just really, really missing.
Some of my favorite public lands in the country are in Utah.
Yeah, mine too. That's not to say that like I'm a person that just likes to get, I'm probably in line with more of those wanderers. Like I don't, I like to use public lands with my family and hike and canoe, and that's how I tend to use those lands. But anybody that uses public lands is going to have a hard time doing it when they're no longer public. I mean, that's just like the fact.
All right. Well, Tim, thank you so much for talking to us tonight, a week out from the election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
If our listeners would like to help out your campaign in this last week, how can they do that?
They could jump on my website at votetimglenn.com, and if they want to donate financially, we would love that. Mostly that's just going to go to like text messaging or digital ads at this point. Or if they want to like actually jump on a phone and call people, that would be cool too.
All right, excellent. And people could go to your Facebook page and say nice things.
Yeah, like the posts that are like very, respectful of other people.
All right. Well, Tim, thank you so much for talking with us, and thank you too for running. I think it's so important that people like you are running for office. From November 3rd to November 6th, be sure to check out the hashtag Wavecast on Twitter. Wavecast will tell the story of the final days of the campaign from our perspective. That's right, from ours. Two Broads Talking Politics is proud to be one of the anchor Twitter accounts for this endeavor. There will be activists tweeting out videos and pictures, reporting on their candidates' campaigns, and describing the final moments as the blue wave crashes over the ballot boxes. So check it out, Wavecast on Twitter. I'm here in this segment with Robert Burch, who's the Democratic nominee for the Utah House in District 30. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So could we start? Could you just tell me a little bit about your background and why you're running for the Utah House this year?
I've been in Utah off and on now for since about 2004. So I'm originally from Decatur, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, and I lived out here, and I moved back to Georgia, and now I'm back out here in Utah. And I just found some kind of magnetism to Utah. I can't explain what it is, but I'm here, and we've enjoyed living here in Utah, my wife and I, and discussed moving somewhere else, but we found that we probably want to stay here. And so with staying here, we also decided, especially as an African American, that we should do something to serve the community, to try to make things better, not just for African Americans, but for everybody. And so we've served the community in a lot of different ways. I'm a Latter-day Saint, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so we've served in church capacities, and we served as volunteers in different capacities. My wife has primarily worked with youth and families who've adopted Black kids and who found those kids have had trouble adjusting to a predominantly white community. And so she and I have together tried to serve all of Utah with those children to make sure they get acculturated in such a way that their parents who love them can be able to raise them successfully. And from that, I've served in the Utah Black Roundtable, Afro-American Historical Genealogical Society, Sons and Daughters of U.S. Middle Pastors. Just a lot of capacities that my wife and I served. And then so a friend mentioned my name to one of the West Valley City Councilmen. I live here in West Valley, Utah. And he mentioned my name to Jacob Fitzsimonu. And the next thing I know, I had all these Democratic Party people calling me, asking me to run. A really good friend of mine. She's the only African-American representative in the state legislature right now, Sandra Hollins. Ended up having her husband call me. He's one of my fraternity brothers from Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And so when Dave and Sandra finally contacted me, I figured I was in now since I've gotten so many calls from so many people. But, when Sandra Hollins asked, and it was time to make a decision. And so that's how I got here. But it's really been fun. I've learned a lot. Gosh, I've learned more than I ever thought I would about politics and serving the community and getting out there and talking to people. You find out some of the things that they're really, really struggling with. It's very interesting.
So where in Utah is District 30?
We're the northern half of West Valley City. So West Valley, as far as statewide office, the House of Representatives is divided into three parts. The city is divided into three parts. And so I have District 30, the north side of the city.
And so you said that as you're going around and talking to people, you're hearing the things that are worrying them and interesting them right now. What are some of those things that you're hearing from people?
Oh, I've heard so many different things, and it depends on what their ages are and what their specific concerns are, from things like hospital care, health care, especially for parents with children with disabilities. I've talked to several parents who have kids who are autistic and in other ways ill, and having a social services out here that cannot provide for them health-wise or educationally-wise, getting those kids into the right type of school, the right type of environment so that they can become successful. A lot of discussion about Proposition 2, which is about medical cannabis. A lot of people are suffering, again, with family illness and not being able to find a treatment that is effective, and having to go to other states to be able to find what they need for their children and for their family members. Right next door to us, Colorado and Nevada already have cannabis legislation passed, and so a lot of those people end up going to those places to be able to take care of their family members' health needs. And one of the other big things here, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Salt Lake Valley, but our valley is surrounded by mountains on both sides of the valley. And we have a thing that we call inversion, which means that the wind blows the pollution to the side of the mountain and the pollution gets stuck. And so the pollution literally settles down over Salt Lake City, which puts us in the pollution range of some of the worst places in China. So we have a lot of different issues we need to deal with here.
How are people reacting to your campaign? Utah is, as many people know, is kind of a predominantly Republican state. Are people happy to see a Democrat out and running? What does that kind of look like on the ground?
Well, what it looks like on the ground is that, and I don't know if you know this or not, the state of Utah has one of the worst voter turnouts in the nation. I mean, we're literally right near the bottom. And so we have electorate here that simply doesn't turn out to vote. And then it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. The problem being with it being predominantly Republican is that you have a lot of folks who are accustomed to Republicans running everything. And so many of the Republicans don't show up to vote. And then you have many of the Democrats who are accustomed to the Republicans running everything. And so the Democrats don't show up to vote. So we have this kind of weird thing where it's not just trying to get Democrats out to vote, which is probably the most difficult party to get out. It's getting those nonpartisan, unaffiliated, I guess you would call independents out, and getting the Republicans out to vote as well. We generally, as Democrats and independents, lose by default simply because many times we don't show up. But it has been different this year, and I think it's probably because of the kind of animus that we have on a national level. And so we have people who identify themselves as nonpartisan or unaffiliated who find out I am a Democrat, and they're very excited. They're happy to finally see a Democrat running for office in this particular district, and who's come out and knocked on their doors and came out to meet them and talk to them and get to know them. So they're very excited about it. And we hope all their hard work makes a difference for us in the next 6 days.
I noticed that one of the issues on your website is public education. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about education and, kind of what you would like to see the State House doing in terms of education.
Well, one of the things that we are looking at this year is this non-binding question about using potential gas tax to increase funding for education and for local roads. Again, one of the bad things about this state is that our funding for our education system is near the bottom in the nation. And what started out as a proposition from our schools now was because the legislature for many years were not interested in bringing forth the money we needed for education. So our schools now formed in order to bring a proposition before the body to get them to think about legislation to increase school funding. They were able to reach a compromise with most of what they wanted, and the last part of it is right now it's a 10-cent increase on gas tax to try to see if we can get the money that we need to properly fund the schools and fund some of the needs of the teachers who are in the schools. So that is a big deal. Another big deal for me is there's a real disconnect between many of the school boards here in Utah with the teacher associations. That type of relationship is not good for the kids because we have management on one side, teachers on the other side, and no way to move forward. So much of the things that are being done right now in the granted school system are without teacher input, which end up being ineffective in operating the schools. So we're essentially just wasting money. So we need to find a way to get those two bodies to be able to collaborate and make sure that we're not wasting the few tax dollars that we do have for education.
What are some of the other things you're doing besides knocking on doors? What are some of the other kinds of events you've been doing to kind of raise awareness of your candidacy?
Oh, we have done everything from activities in the park to youth events. So that one of the best events we had this year was actually having the youth come out to meet the candidates so they can understand what's going on in their community, and just reaching out to certain segments, whether it's the gay and lesbian community, to make sure that they understand and know that we care about them, the Black community, Hispanic and Polynesian or Pacific Islander community. We have a very large community out here of Pacific Islanders that include Tongan, Samoan, Hawaiian, and other Asians, Japanese, and so forth. And so reaching out to those communities in some of their events, coming out to speak and meet people so we can make sure they understand that we care about what they care about.
And do you think that then, you mentioned the low voter turnout. Do you think those numbers are going to be up this year?
Yes, I think so. We actually were checking on some of the numbers night before last, and the mail-in ballots are already more than 50% of the last midterm. So we know a lot of folks are voting, and they're voting early, which is good. We just want to see how much of that is going to sway our way, and we're really trying to work those numbers. I think with the atmosphere, a lot of those people who are identified independent in some sort are really what makes a difference for us out here in Utah for the Democratic Party, is to get those voters to sway towards us, especially with the women. We have a huge problem with female voting in Utah. A lot of these women, as of tradition here in the culture here in Utah, have always given their votes per se to their husbands. So the only person in the family that was registered to vote was the husband, and whatever he decided is what the wife accepted. So we have literally 280,000 women who are eligible to vote who are not registered to vote. So we're hoping that we can get some of those women to show up and vote for Democrats.
I saw that you were endorsed by the LDS Dems this year, and that this was their first year of endorsing candidates. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, that's a sort of uniquely Utah thing, of course, having one religious group have such a big percentage of the citizens in the state, and then being a caucus within the Democratic Party.
At some point, and I'm not exactly sure how this occurred, there became the belief, and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that to be a good Latter-day Saint meant you was a Republican. I'm not sure exactly, again, how that came about, but it did. So that meant that generally there was ill will towards people who were not Republicans, meaning if you was Latter-day Saint and you was a Democrat, then there was something wrong with you. I don't know if you saw, but recently, just a couple of days ago, the leadership of the church gave an announcement through the Salt Lake Tribune that they were neutral on parties and that all parties had something beneficial to offer, which we think is good, because now you don't it. Hopefully, it will not continue to be a red badge of courage to be able to say that you are LDS and that you're a Democrat, which is a big deal, because for LDS Democrats, it's been a long time coming and a lot of hard work to get acceptance in the community as a political party and a political caucus in a party that didn't seem to be favored because of whatever institutional ideas that was created years ago.
Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure we talk about?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me that I want here is that we really want the women to get registered and to come out and vote, and to recognize that the things in this state that affect them the most, they can have some say in. Not just here in Utah, but throughout the entire country and indeed the entire world, where women are being negatively affected. And these sisters, these women need to start standing up for themselves and start speaking for themselves and making sure that they get the thing being respected. This was one of the first things I spoke about at the beginning of my campaign in April, is that the women here need to demand the respect that they deserve, because we have some great women, very well educated, great personalities and characters. They have great character, and they need to make sure that the things that they need are provided for, and not just simply accept what they're given by a body of men who may not necessarily understand what they need. I want for them to speak up, to show up and vote, and make their voices heard and help make this community better. Just like with the rest of the country, there are a huge number of women running here for office in Utah this year. They need to step forward. They need to be representatives, and they need to voice their concerns in the State House as well as the U.S. House.
If our listeners would like to help support your campaign in these final few days, how can they do that?
You can go to birchforutah.com. That is my website. And the second tab over says donate. You can donate to our campaign. We're in the last 6 days. We're trying to have a really great big push to get out there and reach people, and whether it's through mail or through phone calls, whatever form it is, it requires money, and we need to be able to do that. And also, if you have access to any of the information on Facebook, you can find me, Robert Burch, House District Candidate 30 on Facebook, and reach out to some of those women and indeed a lot of our friends out here who are just needing some moral support and some kind words and help us push forward, especially for the entire Democratic Party for this entire state.
All right, excellent. We'll put a link to your website up on our website as well.
Yes.
Robert, thank you so much for speaking with me, and thank you for running this year.
Thank you for having me, Kelly. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys keep an eye on us. We're going to try to make some great historical changes out here in Utah. And just like with the rest of the country, we hope we can do well.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.